Hello, I'm the Glove Street blogger, and I'm going to talk about the books I read in April. Now, I might have mentioned before that I volunteer at the Dr. Johnson House Museum, and I sit at the desk and I take the money and I do the shop. And behind me, there's this cupboard called a cellaret. It was essentially a drinks cabinet that had been walled up. It was the original 18th century one, but been walled up for a long time and exposed. Now, we don't put booze in our cellaret, which is a pain. We put books. Maybe it's a Miss Booze books. And the books don't make a lot of sense, the ones that are in this thing. They're just random books that people have put there at times. There's a lot of Daphne du Maurier in there. And there was this. It's called The Gates by John Connolly. And it's a children's book-ish. And I'm guessing it was there. I'm guessing they had a book launch there because this is the main character is called Samuel Johnson, and he has a dog called Boswell. Samuel Johnson is 11 years old. He's a kid, and some of his neighbours accidentally open the gates of hell. Yeah, so they perform a satanic ritual. It just so happens that they've turned the Large Hadron Collider on, and the two things together open the gates of hell, and they start creeping into this town, and it's up to Samuel Johnson and Boswell to stop them. Yeah, I'd say it's kind of for children. It's got a very sort of quippy, kids on bikes, childish kind of tone, but then some really gory stuff happens. Like there's a butcher who's torn apart by demons and things like that. But then some of the jokes are very, very childish or child-led. There's a sort of running joke that's a lot like the one in Series of Unfortunate Events, where words are defined in certain ways and there's lots of footnotes. If anything, I'd say it's a slightly more child-ish version of Good Omens kind of tone. It goes for and grabs jokes everywhere. I mean, there's no actual reason why the main character's called Samuel Johnson, or why he has a dog called Boswell, or why they teacher is Mr. Hume. And all the streets around them are named after Lovecraft things, which makes sense because of the whole demons bit. And then there's a demon called Nerd, who sort of is a source of slapstick physical comedy, and it's fun enough. It reminds me of Good Omens, which is like I would have really have liked that when I was younger, but now it's not quite my thing. I may have mentioned in the last video that I went to Paris. So I was going to go to Paris. I did. I came back with no money, a hangover, and a little bust of Voltaire. There he is, with his pointy nose. His cool little dreads. So there's Voltaire. So, what did I read? Well, I read Eugénie Grandet by Honoré de Balzac. I have been wanting to read some of his for a while. I heard they were really good. This realism thing. I read a few of those realists going on. And I didn't really know where to begin with de Balzac because he wrote 100 books in this series that he called the Human Comedy. Well, where do you start with that? Well, I just started with the one I happened to have on the shelf. It tells the story of Eugénie, who is a woman who has been brought up by this horrible miser of a father. He's a really extreme miser. He used to be a cooper, but now he owns land. And actually, he's a really astute, almost supernatural businessman because his miserly abilities make him jump on opportunities really quickly. And they're so poor no, not poor, they're rich, but he treats them in so poor a fashion that everything's old and decrepit, and he'll quibble and argue over a little bit of extra butter or the ingredients for a cake rather than some bread. They're really in straitened circumstances because of him. They don't particularly notice it. One day, their cousin comes, and he is from Paris, and he's got all the neat gear, and he's got a really nice travel set that's all gold, got gold bits on it, and he's very sort of well-to-do. He thinks when he's going to visit his uncle, that his uncle will have like a chateau and grouse hunting or something. No, so he's quite surprised, and Eugénie and the mum like sneak and use their own money to like give him sugar lumps for his tea and stuff, to try and make him feel comfortable and welcome. He's been sent there by his dad, who has become bankrupt and then killed himself. And so this is revealed, and he then goes off to the West Indies. But in the brief time before he goes off to West Indies, he and Eugénie kind of fall in love. And Eugénie holds on to this love. Also, she gives him these sort of commemorative coins that she collects in return for his travel case. And he takes the coins and invests them in the West Indies, and she keeps hold of the travel case, waiting for him to come back. And essentially, he just doesn't for a long time, and when he does, he's forgotten about her. It's a tragedy. It's about how poor old Eugénie, everything, she could have had the love of her mother, a love of her father, a love of this cousin. What is it with Victorians and marrying cousins? Well, there's just not enough people around in Victorian times. There's just too much cousin marriage. Out of the books I've read, I think 3 of them have cousin marriages in them because they're all Victorian. It's not good. Anyway, it is a tragedy. It's sort of a quiet tragedy of, people do die, but it's not the deaths, it's the loneliness and the sort of, she just lives her whole life without love, and money just strangles everything. And it's a bit of a theme of these French books is money, because next I've got Henri Murger, Tales from the Latin Quarter, Scenes from the Latin Quarter. The Balzac book is set in the countryside. This one is set in Paris, and I stayed up 7 floors in a Parisian garret with all the roofs around me, and Montmartre in the distance. And I actually went to Montmartre, and I went to the cemetery where this guy is buried, and I sat by his grave and made a chapter of that. I shouldn't like Scenes from the Latin Quarter. It's what La Boheme is based on, and Rent in a sort of weakly distant influence way. It's about something that really annoys me. Artists who think that they're better than everyone else, and so they deserve everything for free, and because they're better people, because they're artists, they deserve more, and so when they're living this bohemian life, they should get more and be allowed not to pay rent and stuff. And as a writer who sadly hasn't been very successful so far, I've had my bohemian times, I've had my starving times, and you kind of want to say, just grow up, get a job and write as well. True, I mean, you're like me, you're just pootling along and not getting anywhere maybe, but still, these kind of people usually annoy me in books, but these ones didn't, because one, they saw it as a moment in time. They knew they were going through their stage of penniless artistry. There's a painter, a writer, a philosopher, and a musician, and they knew they'd get there eventually, and in fact by the end of it they do. And there's a joy in them. They're really good friends together. They're tight. They have a camaraderie, them against the world, and you really buy into them as a friendship group, and you start liking them. And even the ones who aren't as, like, there's one called Chaunard, who is this, he's kind of sneaky. He takes fake prop money out to jangle in his pockets to make him seem rich, to lure women back and stuff like that. As a result, his dressing gown is French can-can dancer's petticoat. But even with people like him, because they have the friendship and they show their best side to each other, you get to see them at their best. And then they have relationships. There's Mimi, and there's La Musette, and there's Fini. because it's Euphemia, but they call her Feeny. She's the nutty one. Mimi is the one who dies tragically, and then La Musette is the one who becomes successful, and so too successful to hang out with these losers. Part of it was I was in Paris in the eaves, drinking my wine, reading the book. Part of it was that, but part of it was just this camaraderie, this sense of we're young, we're gonna try a bit of art, we're gonna go for it as full as we can, and hopefully we'll get through this stage and we'll be a success. Our integrity doesn't rely on us being poor and starving, and I really got to like them. Even if they could be a bit despicable sometimes. So the next book I read was called The Belly of Paris by Emile Zola. And a bit like Balzac, he's got a large sort of connected project. Oh, these French. They can't just write a novel, can they? So it's a 20-book series based on family, but it's a very loose holding together, and I just happened to pick this book up when I was in Paris. It's set in the central market. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a sort of like Covent Garden market of Paris, the big central one. And it's got a real striking beginning. Somebody's been sent away unfairly to prison colonies in French Guiana, and they've come back. And they've crawled, they've got to France, and they've crawled through the countryside, and they've got to Paris, and they are starving, and they've been starving for over 10 years, basically. And now they're just knackered, and they can't quite get into Paris. And this vegetable seller puts him on a cart, drives to the main market, unloads him along with the veg. So now there's a starving man surrounded by just veg everywhere. And the descriptions of food in this are wonderful. And then it's just all this veg, and it's described as looking like diamonds, and he's got a really painterly way. I mean, he was literally friends with painters and impressionists and things, and there is an impressionist element to the book, like very washy sort of blue colours in the first chapter of this veg being unloaded in the very early morning. Luckily for him, near the market, which is where he was trying to get to, his brother runs a successful charcuterie, and they take him in. And an alternative translation title is The Thins versus the Fats. I'm always seeing, when I looked at some reviews and things, it was like haves and have-nots. It's not that. The Thins are the people who are hungry for more. So Claude Lantier, one of the characters they meet, who has his own book later on, is a painter, and he's hungry for a new kind of art. The main character in here, Florent, he's hungry for political change. And then the fats are those who are satisfied. So there are some street urchins in this described as fat, even though they're physically thin, because they are satisfied with their lives as street urchins. They're happy together, and they're happy playing around this market. And so the story is very thin. So this character has been taken in by his family, and he doesn't fit in, and that's essentially what happens. And his very presence stirs up tensions in the market, and eventually the fats turn on the thin because they're scared of him, because he wants to change things, and they're happy with things how they are. Each chapter has a different foodstuff that is lovingly described. So it's veg, then it's charcuterie products, then it's fish. There's a bit about poultry underground. There's a cheese chapter, and then there's a pigeon stuffing chapter. And they're really beautiful, these descriptions of food. But at the same time, they fill in with this whole fat, stuffed, satisfied Paris. And I can't take the piss out of fat people. Look at me. But fat, stuffed, satisfied Paris. And I'm satisfied. Paris. Sort of lazy and complacent. But viciously ready to turn on anyone who's different. And although Scenes from the Latin Quarter was my favourite of these French books, I did prefer the Zola to the Balzac, because it had more drama to it, and it had more of a this sort of description and painterly thing, and the Balzac seemed a little bit bare bones on the whole. Next then, I had Lust for Life, by Emile, not Zest for Life. I mean, it's Joie de Vivre in the original French by Emile Zola again. And the reason I got that was because the main character of this is a bit part in this. So the charcuterie owners have a daughter called Pauline, and she becomes the main character in this. But what is weird is that even though she's the main character, he doesn't do anything with that, which is I thought was really strange because she's 10. Her parents have died. They've left her all the charcuterie and the money, and it's been sold off, and all the money's gone with her to her new guardians, and she just says, "Oh, I don't remember my previous life in Paris anymore," and so she's not the same character. It was weird because she was an interesting character in the Belly of Paris. She was this kind of preened, overly looked after, pretty dressed doll, essentially, and then she's nothing like that in this new book, and I thought that was weird. What's also weird is it's almost the opposite book. So in Belly of Paris, it's those poor, the thins, the people who want to change things, being set upon by the stuffed, satisfied bourgeoisie. When this one, she is a fat, she's a satisfied person. And everyone around her is unsatisfied and essentially tears her apart for everything they can get from her, for her money, for her love, for her attention. And she never complains. She's always happy. Well, not every moment she's happy, but in general, she's always happy, even as the family she is adopted by take all her money, waste it on stupid things. The person she falls in love with, again, her cousin, goes off and marries another cousin. Despite the fact that they were going to marry, and then she realises, oh, he actually loves this other cousin, so she sacrificed herself. She's very self-sacrificing. And it's just, this one was stodgy and just miserable. There was just so much sickness in it. There was at least 4 long descriptions of gouty attacks, and the whole last chunk is all about gnarled, gout-ridden hands and feet and things. There's the most painful, awkward birth you could read that goes on for pages and pages. There's a fever. There was somebody who gets dropsy, something swells up, and there's just so much illness, and it ended with sudden surprise suicide. Who I wasn't expecting that person to kill themselves either. And everybody except for the main character of Pauline, it's just so miserable. It's just a really miserable time. I didn't enjoy it very much at all, really. It was good. It's well written, but it's just not fun. And though the Belly of none of no, that's not fair. I'm not saying none of these books are fun. The Latin Quarter was fun, but the Eugénie, Grandet, Belly of Paris, and Zest for Life were not fun. But the Belly of Paris had so many great scenes of this food and this description that was worth it. Yeah, and Eugénie Grandet had some good sort of side characters who were a bit snidey and sneaky and trying to get in with them, and they were quite fun. But this Lust for Life, I mean, she falls in love with her cousin, but she doesn't seem to know anyone else. I mean, she used to in the other book, but now she doesn't know anybody. I think if she'd met literally any other man other than her cousin, she would have fallen in love with them and had a much happier life of it. But there you go. So I didn't read as much this month as I do other months because, partly I was having a nice time in Disney. Here's some photos of that. And then also partly, I don't know, I went back to work and I was just sleepy. Oh well. Next month I'm going to be looking at, Leon Garfield. If you've watched any of these, you'll have heard that name before. But these are the last 5 Leon Garfield books ever for me. once I've read these, I've read every published piece of Leon Garfield, short story, novel, everything. So there's that. See you next month.